Hey everybody, back out here at the whiteboard again, and today we're going to talk all about chokes. Now, this is something that in the past, I would say past few years, but for a while now, chokes have gotten a lot more complicated than they used to be. And kind of like with the shot size video, today we're going to figure out what actually matters. So, what is a choke? Well, basically, all a choke is the amount of constriction at the end of a barrel of a shotgun. Then that determines how tight the pattern is downrange. So essentially, a no choke or a small choke means you're going to have a bigger pattern at a closer range, and a tighter choke means you're going to have a more dense pattern further downrange. To kind of wrap your mind around that, picture like you're throwing a cone, and with a cylinder or a small choke, your cone from the point of fire is going to be wider. To where with a tighter choke, that cone is going to be a little bit longer, like that. Your standard chokes are cylinder, improved cylinder, modified, improved modified, full, extra full, trying to write without both hands, and super full. Now, these last two are a fairly recent development. For decades, the top of the line was full, unless you went and had some custom work done by a gunsmith, and a few dedicated people probably did that, but for over-the-counter kind of thing, full was top of the line. With turkey hunting, you're pretty much always going to want a full choke. That's what people used for decades to take turkeys, and it works just fine. Nowadays, we have the extra and super full, and that can work good too. That doesn't mean that a full choke won't get the job done. Also though, if you have a gun with a modified choke, that doesn't mean it won't work neither. However, to fully understand chokes, it is important that we get a little bit technical and we write some numbers down, because as simple as they are, they can get really confusing, especially with modern advertisements and so many different brands of chokes and a lot of claims that are being made out there. I think it's important that we see the actual differences on the table so that we can know what's real and what's just hype. So for this next part, some of y'all are going to love it, some of y'all might hate it, but we got to get technical and we got to put some numbers down. So let's get started. With a cylinder, that's basically no choke. So your constriction is going to be none, and your percentage of bore is also going to be 0%. So your first real choke is going to be the improved cylinder. Technically there's a few chokes in between, but they're very specialized for skeet, tramp, and sport and clay shooting, and we're really not going to talk about them. Your first real choke is going to be the improved cylinder. So its constriction is 0.010, or otherwise it is 1.37% of the original bore diameter. Now your modified is going to be 0.020, or 2.74% of your original bore diameter. Now here's where it gets a little bit funky. This is a 0.010 difference, and that's going to be true for most of them except for your improved modified. Now personally, I've never seen a gun that's been stamped with an improved modified choke, so that may be a somewhat specialized choke that people use if they want to get between a full and a modified. But anyway, its constriction, instead of 0.030 like you'd think, it's going to be 0.025. For any mathematicians out there, the percentage is 3.43 of your original bore diameter. Now for a full choke, we pick back up on that 0.010 increase again, except now we're starting from 0.025, so a full is going to be 0.035. Now folks, you're going to have to bear with me and support this channel for a little bit, because I don't even have any other colored pens besides black right now, and so to separate these I've drew a squiggly line. The reason I did that is, like I mentioned earlier, in your traditional old school guns, full is typically where that would stop unless you had some custom work done. But with modern chokes, we have screw-in chokes, which I'll show you here in a minute, and you can swap out chokes in the same gun. So you're not stuck with the same one. And really, once those come around, we started getting into the extra full and the super full chokes, which are really specialized for turkey hunting. Now here's the thing though. You might be thinking that with, newer technology and newer chokes, we'd have some pretty intense constriction, but you might not be surprised to learn that the constriction on these chokes just goes up 0.010 more. So our extra full chokes are typically going to be 0.045, and our supers, or sometimes they're Ulta or Ulti, 0.055. So we're going up at the same rate. So if you start looking up chokes, pretty quickly you're going to run across this number right here, the constriction number. And the percentage of bore, that's just something that I put on here to kind of help you picture that. But I think a better way to picture that is if we look at the new muzzle diameter going off our original one, we can separate those and see, the actual difference there and how much that is. Just helps me out a little bit better. If I was going to look at it, that's how I compare them. So let's do that right now. So to do this, it's pretty simple actually. We just got to take our original bore diameter, which for a 12 gauge, it's typically 0.729 inches. And all we got to do is subtract the constriction number, and we get our new muzzle diameter. So for a cylinder, or basically no choke, we know that we've got 0.729. For an improved cylinder, it's going to be 0.719. Modified, 0.709. Now here it gets a little funky, remember, because we only go by 5. So we're going to be 0.704. Your full, we're getting out of the 7s, going 0.694, 0.684. Almost looks like a 0 there. Let me get rid of that. There we go, 0.684 for extra full, and 0.674 for your super full chokes. Alright, so instead of explaining them one by one, I went ahead and put the percentage smaller than bore over here so you can see that, your cylinder, it's the same size as the cylinder. Now let's go with your full, for example. It's 4.8% of a constriction compared to the original bore. And your super full going to be about 7.5, 7.54 technically. Alright, now I think would be a good time to address these two bottom chokes here, talk about those for a little bit. I mentioned screw-in chokes earlier, and what that is they look like this. They've got these real fine threads that you screw them directly down into the barrel of your gun, and you have a different choke. You can swap them out. So essentially it makes your one gun a lot more versatile. So let's say you're hunting turkeys. You can run a full, extra, super full, something like that. But let's say your buddy invites you out to the skeet range, go shooting there. You can pick yourself up one of these, a choke, in improved cylinder or modified if you want to, and you can put it in, and then you've got a wider pattern for those closer range clays as they come your way. They may only be 15, 20 yards away, and so you want a wider pattern. So you don't have to go out and buy a completely new gun. You can just pick yourself up a new choke. Now, all of your older, more classic guns, probably 1970s at least, maybe up into the 1980s. I'm not exactly sure what year they came out with the interchangeable chokes, but your old guns are all going to be fixed choke, which just means that the choke is physically built into the barrel and it naturally has a taper to it at the end. Now, it probably won't come through great on camera, but to show you that, I've got an old gun here, and first I'm going to show you that it's unloaded. So there's nothing in here, nothing in the tube, nothing up in the barrel. Now this is a pretty special gun, and I've got a dedicated video coming out on it pretty soon, but it's one of those that If you know, you know. So stay tuned if you want to hear more about this bad boy. But this sucker here, it was made in 1957, and it has a fixed choke. So I already showed you it's unloaded here. So if I pointed a little bit toward the camera, I don't know how good it'll pick up, but you can see that there's no way to put anything down in there. If I was to take an adjustable choke, like I've got right here, and try to put down there, it's not gonna work. There's no threads down here, and it's pretty tight. I can barely fit my fingertip in there. To where this, I believe this is a modified choke. It goes a little bit further before I get any kind of resistance. This is a full choke. This one's come with a fixed full choke. Now these older guns will have it stamped on them what kind of choke they have. Most of the time, unless they're really, really old, they may not have any markings, and you'll have to do another way to test it, and we'll talk about that as well. But this one is stamped, and it's probably not going to pick up good from where you're at, but it's right here, so I may insert a clip of me showing it to you a little bit closer up. Here's the close-up on that old gun, guys, and you can see right here to the right there beside 12 gauge, where it says full, that is the indication of the choke. So that shows that this barrel on this gun has a fixed full choke. Now, back in the day, if you wanted to change chokes, you would have to get a completely different barrel with a different built-in choke, and that's how you'd swap it out then. Still possible, but a little bit more expensive. So, what does all this mean for you and me? Well, for me, it means that a full choke is always pretty much good to go for me. Why is that? Well, that's because, personally, I won't shoot at a turkey that I think is further than 40 yards away. I use your standard traditional lead loads, and like I've talked about in that last video, lead just really starts to lose its oomph around that 50-yard mark and a little bit before, I think. Not saying it can't be done, but for me personally, I consider 40 yards a long shot on a turkey, and your standard old school full choke is good enough. It gets it. It gets me a tight pattern at 40 yards, and here before too long, we'll take you to the range and we'll do some shooting, and we'll actually see some data like that. We'll see what that looks like on an actual target. Now, people have different hunting styles than me. The modern tungsten loads that have come out have really opened up the floodgates on how far people are shooting at turkeys. There's people shooting turkeys at 60, 70, 80 yards, which to me is just, that's another video as well. But anyway, people do that, and with tungsten, it's debatable if that's ethical or not, but the companies are claiming it is, and plenty of turkeys have been killed at those distances with those loads. But to do it, you've got to have one of these tighter chokes. A standard full choke was never designed to shoot past about 40 yards, 45, 50 being the absolute top. Because some duck hunters will use a full choke, especially back in the day. Old-time duck hunters, they didn't have the big 3.5-inch Magnum loads that we've got today. Now they had some 3-inch come along pretty early on to get a little bit more pellets, but even still, they needed a tight pattern for those ducks that were going to be far away, especially late in the season. They're more hesitant, they've been shot at a lot, they're not going to come in that close, and so full choke, that's what they used. Now to be clear, I'm not harping on these chokes. I actually had a Mossberg 835 Ultimag, wonderful, wonderful turkey gun. It was in the mossy oak greenleaf pattern, had an overboard barrel, it shot 3.5-inch shells, and it had, I don't know if it was considered an extra or a super. I want to say it was a super full choke. They called it the Ulti Full, but I'm pretty sure it's a super full choke. But I ended up getting rid of that gun just because it could do more than the way I like to hunt. I didn't need it, and I prefer a more old school gun. They work just fine for me. But if you're going to do that, you should really look into these. But the biggest thing by far, and I keep hinting at this in my videos, is despite what the data says, the real only way you're going to know what works is to get out and shoot it and see what it does on paper at distance with your particular gun, your ammunition. And from what I've heard with those screw-in chokes, Even the different brands can affect, you know, some guns like different chokes and some don't. So you just got to experiment a little bit, but that's where it starts to get complicated. And besides these numbers here, I really don't like complicated much. I think a lot of things, people overcomplicate them and they forget how simple it is. Now to bring that back around, let's take a look here and I'll show you. We notice that on the constriction, it still just goes up by 0.010. So essentially, what this means, what's the difference in using a full versus an extra or super full? Well, that is exactly the same difference as if you were using, let's say you want to go from full to super full. It's the same exact difference as going from a modified to a full. It's the same number, same difference. And with that, a modified can flat out kill a turkey. If you get a turkey that comes into that 20, 25, maybe 30 yard range, modified chokes, that's going to be just fine. It's going to be great. And here's you a sneaky little trick. So double barrel shotguns, they're pretty great because a lot of them are older, and with 2 barrels, they've got fixed chokes, but your right barrel may be a full choke, and your left barrel might be a modified. So what that means is, if you really want to get simple but complicated, is if you're in the turkey woods and turkey comes in from the side or something, 20 yards, you've probably got 2 triggers. You've at least got 2 barrels, but especially if you've got 2 triggers and you can pick which barrel you want to shoot at, shoot out of that modified barrel, because that pattern is going to open up a lot faster and you'll be more likely to get your bird that way. As if it was a super tight pattern, you might pull off a little bit or flinch when you pull the trigger. That real tight pattern, yeah, it's got a lot of energy, but it may miss, especially if he's bobbing his head back and forth. If he's further at standard turkey distance, or you know, that kind of 30 to 40 yard range, blast him with the full barrel. So the old side-by-sides and some over-unders, I reckon, too, they've got a built-in advantage that really gets overlooked. And I don't have a real good one, but I'm keeping my eyes peeled for a good side-by-side, probably a 16 gauge. And we'll talk about that in another video as well. Got a lot to cover with you guys, and we're just scratching the surface, but I hope you bear with me as I get these videos out to you. If you do like the content, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what kind of choke you're using, what kind of ammo, what kind of gun. I'd love to get that conversation started down in the comments and interact with you a little bit. Until next time, this is Gentry Lake and Field, where the good old days live on.